Oops, I can tell you exactly what we're doing. We are reading essay number, or speech number 2, or conversation, I don't know, whatever they are, from Thinking, edited by John Brockman. This is Philip Tetlock, How to Win at Forecasting. And we finished last time talking about the 1% challenge. I recall Daniel Kahneman having said on a number of occasions that when he's talking to people in large organizations, private or public sector, he challenges the seriousness of their commitment to improving judgment and choice. The challenge takes the following form. Would you be willing to devote 1% of your annual budget to efforts to improve judgment and choice? And to the best of my knowledge, as of this writing, I'm ad-libbing right now, in 2013, I don't think he's had any takers yet. One of the things I've discovered in my work on assessing the accuracy of probability judgment is that there is much more eagerness in participating in these exercises among people who are younger and lower in status in organizations than there is among people who are older and higher in status in organizations. Okay, sure. But I am seeing exactly what kind of people you're talking about. Because I've had tons of young people be interested in, because they're like, well, I guess that would be the rational explanation, that they're like, this gives me a chance to get ahead, get a leg up on these old high status folk, get up there on that high status, and then that even though that might be rational. That is also the natty response. That makes sense, right? That there would be an it in a social species when presented an opportunity. Especially an easy opportunity. It's not actually easy, but it probably sounds easy. These people are, I just got to learn a couple words, a couple biases or whatever, and I'm going to be smartest one in the room. Nice. But they don't actually realize how flawed they are. But anyway, so I'm just mad. Because, I'm sure they show there's much more eagerness. Well, he said eagerness in participating. That's good. But I'm sure there is. I've heard them talk. Of course they're open to learning new ways, learning new stuff. But are they going to fucking do it? Okay, yes, they will. I'm just mad. It doesn't require great psychological insight to understand this. You have a lot more to lose if you're senior and well-established and your judgment is revealed to be far less calibrated than that of people who are far junior to you. Okay? Didn't think of that at all. Yeah, sure. Yes. You have a lot more to lose if... I don't feel like they think is that true? Is this confirmed in any way? Because I'm surprised that these senior high status people really think they're risking anything. Because they've noticed things about decision making in their careers. They're probably just they probably think they're just along to hear the same stuff they've already figured out themselves. And alright. Do you have evidence for this? Is this one of the things I've discovered in my work on assessing the accuracy, blah, 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 is that there's... he's worked with them. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit high. So he would have noted if they... it's just me. I haven't been able to make it click for people. Okay, he did great. Alright, excuse me. Let's get back to it. Level playing field forecasting exercises are radically meritocratic. They put everybody on the same playing field. Tom Friedman no longer has an advantage over an unknown columnist or, for that matter, an unknown graduate student. If Tom Friedman's subjective probability estimate for how things are going in the Middle East is less accurate than that of the graduate student at Berkeley, the forecasting tournament just cranks through the numbers, and that's what you discover. These are potentially radically status destabilizing interventions. I now understand. I now understand. We're talking about in the context of these, so they're actually going to be revealed. Oh, it's at a tournament. I thought it was just some kind of a class or something, where, nobody's going to really know how you did it. I understand now. I'm all caught up. Alright, I've caught up with you. Alright. These are potentially radically status destabilizing interventions. They have the potential to destabilize status relationships within government agencies. They have the potential to destabilize the status within the private sector. The primary claim that people higher in status organizations have to holding their positions is cognitive in nature. They know better. They know things that the people below them don't know. And insofar as forecasting exercises are probative and give us insight into who knows what about what, they are again status destabilizing. From a sociological point of view, it's a minor miracle that this forecasting tournament is even occurring. Government agencies are not supposed to sponsor exercises that have the potential to embarrass them. It would be embarrassing if it turns out that thousands of amateurs working on relatively small budgets are able to outperform professionals within a multi-billion-dollar bureaucracy. That would be destabilizing. If it turns out that junior analysts within the multi-billion-dollar bureaucracy can perform better than people high up in the bureaucracy, that would be destabilizing. If it turns out that the CEO is not nearly as good as people 2 or 3 tiers down in perceiving strategic threats to the business, that's destabilizing. Things that bring transparency to judgment are dangerous to your status. You can make a case for this happening in medicine, for example. Insofar as evidence-based medicine protocols become increasingly influential, doctors are going to rely more and more on the algorithms. Otherwise, they're not going to get their bills paid, bro. If they're not following the algorithms, it's not going to be reimbursable. Oh, okay. When the healthcare system started to approach 20 to 25% of the GDP, very powerful economic actors started pushing back and demanding accountability for medical judgment. The long and the short of the story is that it's very hard for professionals and executives to maintain their status if they can't maintain a certain mystique about their judgment. If they lose that mystique about their judgment, that's profoundly threatening. Don't know why he went with threatening. Well, okay, it's different than destabilizing. My inner sociologist says to me that when a good idea comes up against entrenched interest, I just got my YouTube up. Just put, there we go. That's, if they lose that mystique about their judgment, that's profoundly threatening. My inner sociologist says to me that when a good idea comes up against entrenched interests, the good idea typically fails. But this is going to be a hard thing to suppress. Level playing field forecasting tournaments are going to spread. They're going to proliferate. They're fun. They're informative. They're useful in both the private and public sectors. There's going to be a movement in that direction. How it all sorts out is interesting. To what extent is it going to destabilize the existing pundit hierarchy? To what extent is it going to destabilize who the big shots are within organizations? That's great. The Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency, about 2 years ago, committed to supporting 5 university-based research teams and funded their efforts to recruit forecasters, set up websites for eliciting forecasts, hire statisticians for aggregating forecasts, and conduct a variety of experiments on factors that might either make forecasters more or less accurate. For about 1.5 years, we've been doing actual forecasting. There are 2 aspects of this. There's a horse race aspect to it, and there's a basic science part. The horse race aspect is which team is more accurate? Which team is generating probability judgments that are closer to reality? What does it mean to generate a probability judgment closer to reality? If I say there is a 0.9 likelihood of Obama winning re-election, and Nate Silver says there's a 0.8 likelihood of Obama re-election, and Obama wins the re-election, the person who said 0.9 is closer than the person who said 0.8. So that person deserves a better accuracy score. If someone said 0.2, they get a really bad accuracy score. Thought this was going to lead up to a question. It doesn't. There are some statistical procedures that we use for a method. There are some statistical procedures that we use for a method of scoring probability judgment. It's called Breyer scoring. Breyer scoring is what we are using right now for assessing accuracy. But there are many other statistical techniques that can be applied. Our conclusions are robust across them. But the idea is to get people to make explicit probability judgments and score them against reality. Yet, to make this work, you also have to pose questions that could be resolved in a clear-cut way. You can't say, I think there could be a lot of instability in Afghanistan after NATO forces withdraw in 2014. That's not a good question. The questions need to pass what some psychologists have called the clairvoyance test. Would someone say you're No, I don't know. I'm going to let him explain. Actually, I have not heard this. A good question would be one that I could take and hand to a genuine clairvoyant and ask, what happened? What's the true answer? A clairvoyant could look into the future and tell me about it. The clairvoyant wouldn't have to come back to me and say, what exactly do you mean by could? Or what exactly do you mean by increased violence or increased instability or unrest? The clairvoyant wouldn't have to come back to me and say, what exactly do you mean by could? Or, what exactly do you mean by increased violence or increased instability or unrest? Or whatever the other vague phrases are. We would have to translate them into something testable. An important part of this forecasting tournament is moving away from interesting issues to testable propositions. And this is an area where we discover very quickly where people don't think the way that Karl Popper thought they should think, like falsificationists. We don't naturally look for evidence that could falsify our hunches, and passing the clairvoyance test requires doing that. If you think that the Eurozone is going to collapse, if you think it was a really bad idea to put into common currency economies at very different levels of competitiveness like Greece and Germany, that was a fundamentally unsound macroeconomic thing to do, and the Eurozone is doomed. That's a nice example of an emphatic but untestable hedgehog kind of statement. It may be true, but it's not very useful for our forecasting tournament. To make a forecasting tournament work, we have to translate that hedgehog-like hunch into a testable proposition like, will Greece leave the Eurozone or formally withdraw from the Eurozone? Or will Portugal? You need to translate the abstract, interesting issue into testable propositions, and then you need to get lots of thoughtful people to make probability judgments in response to those testable proposition questions. You need to do that over and over and over again. Hedgehogs are more likely to embrace fast and frugal heuristics that are in the spirit of a blink. If you have a hedgehog-like framework, you're more likely to think that people who have mastered that framework should be able to diagnose situations quite quickly and reach conclusions quite confidently. Those things tend to co-vary with each other. For example, if you have a generic theory of world politics known as realism, and you believe that when there's a dominant power being threatened by a rising power, say the United States being threatened by China, it's inevitable that those two countries will come to blows in some fashion. If you believe that, then blink will come more naturally to you as a forecasting strategy. Because you have a generic theory known as realism. If you're a fox, and you believe there's some truth to the generalization that rising powers and hegemons tend to come into conflict with each other, but there are lots of other factors in play in the current geopolitical environment that make it less likely that China and the United States will come into conflict, that doesn't allow blink anymore, does it? It leads to, on the one hand and on the other, patterns of reasoning, and you've got to strike some kind of integrative resolution of the conflicting arguments. I get it. I was confused. I get it. Because that's a system 2 operation. That's going to take some nuance. That's not right. That's not that fast. And frugal heuristics. That's system 1 it. Now we're talking system. We're talking 2 its. 2 its. Not 1 its. 2 its. In the IARPA tournament, we're looking at a number of strategies for improving prediction. Some of them are focused on the individual psychological level of analysis. Can we train people in certain principles of probabilistic reasoning that will allow them to become more accurate? The answer is, to some degree, we can. Can we put them together in collaborative teams that will bring out more careful self-critical analysis? To some degree, we can. Those are interventions at the individual level of analysis. Then the question is, you've got a lot of interesting predictions at the individual level. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to combine them to make a formal prediction in the forecasting tournament? It's probably a bad idea to take your best forecaster and submit that person's forecast. You probably want something a little more statistically stable than that. That carries us over into the wisdom of the crowd argument. All right, 3 more pages. M dash. That carries us over into the wisdom of the crowd argument. M dash. The famous Francis Galton Country Fair episode in which the average of 500 or 600 fairgoers make a prediction about the weight of an ox. I forget the exact numbers, but let's say the estimated average prediction was 1,100. The individual predictions were anywhere from 300 to 14,000. When we trim outliers and average, it came to 1,103, and the true answer was 1,102. Again, I forget the exact numbers, but the average was more accurate than all of the individuals from whom the average was derived. I haven't got all the details right there, but that's a stylized representation of the aggregation argument. There is some truth to that. There is some truth to that in the IARPA tournament. That simple averaging of the individual forecasters helps. But you can take it further. You can go beyond individual averaging, and you can move to more complex weighted averaging kinds of formulas of the sort. For example, the Nate Silver and various other polymetricians were using, that Nate Silver and various other polymetricians were using in the 2012 election. But we're not aggregating polls anymore. We're aggregating individual forecasters in sneaky and mysterious ways. Computers are an important part of the story. In Moneyball, algorithms destabilized the status hierarchy. You remember in the movie there was this nerdy kid amid the seasoned older baseball scouts, and the nerdy kid was more accurate than the seasoned baseball scouts? Period. Great. It created a lot of friction there. This is a recurring theme in the psychological literature. The tension between human-based forecasting and machine or algorithm-based forecasting. It goes back to 1954. Paul Meehl wrote on clinical versus actuarial prediction, in which clinical psychologists and psychiatrists' predictions were being compared to various algorithms. Over the last 58 years, there have been hundreds of studies done comparing human-based prediction to algorithm or machine-based prediction, and the track record don't look good for the people. People just keep getting their butts kicked over and over again. We don't have geopolitical algorithms that we're comparing our forecasters to, but we're turning our forecasters into algorithms, and those algorithms are outperforming the individual forecasters by substantial margins. One more time. We don't have we don't have geopolitical algorithms that we're comparing our forecasts to. We're turning our forecasters into algorithms, and those algorithms are outperforming the individual forecasters by substantial margins. There's another thing you can do, though, and it's more the wave of the future. And that is, you can go beyond human versus machine or human versus algorithm comparison, or Kasparov versus Deep Blue, the famous chess competition, and ask, how well could Kasparov play chess if Deep Blue were advising him? What would the quality of chess be there? Would Kasparov and Deep Blue have a FIDE chess rating of 3,500 as opposed to Kasparov's rating of, say, 2,800 and the machine's rating of, say, 2,900? That is a new and interesting frontier for work, and it's one we're experimenting with. And if you watch like chess videos, or wait, have I ever actually seen video footage of it, or is it just people talking about it? Yeah, because you have stockfish, or if you've ever just like practiced, you can use stockfish, and it'll tell you what you should do. But this I can't relate to this at all. I'm 950, bro. So I'm gonna stop talking. In our tournament, we skimmed off the very best forecasters in the first. In our tournament, we skimmed off the very first. In our tournament, we skimmed off the very best forecasters in the first year, the top 2%. We call them super forecasters. They're working together in 5 teams of 12 each, and they're doing very impressive work. We're experimentally manipulating their access to the algorithms as well. They get to see what the algorithms look like, as well as their own predictions. The question is, do they do better when they know what the algorithms are, or do they do worse? There are different schools of thought in psychology about this, and I have some very respected colleagues who disagree with me on it. My initial hunch was that they might be able to do better. My initial hunch was that they might be able to do better. Some very respected colleagues believe that they're probably going to do worse. The most amazing thing about this tournament is that it exists because it is so potentially status destabilizing. Another amazing and wonderful thing about this tournament is how many really smart, thoughtful people are willing to volunteer essentially enormous amounts of time to make this successful. We offer them a token honorarium. We're paying them right now $150 or $250 a year for their participation. The ones who are really taking it seriously, it's way less than minimum wage. Yeah. Oh, right, because it's not actually going to be that many hours in the course of the year, right? Okay. And there's some very thoughtful professionals who are participating in this. Some political scientists I know have had some disparaging things to say about the people who might participate in something like this, and one phrase that comes to mind is unemployed news junkies. I don't think that's a fair characterization of our forecasters. Certainly the most actively engaged of our forecasters are really pretty awesome. They're very skillful at finding information, synthesizing it, and applying it, and then updating the response to new information. And they're very rapid updaters. There is a saying that's very relevant to this whole thing, which is that life only makes sense looking backward, but it has to be lived going forward. My life has just been a quirky, path-dependent meander. I wound up doing this because I was recruited in a fluky way to a National Research Council Committee on American-Soviet Relations in 1983 and 1984. The Cold War was at its height. I was by far the most junior member of the committee. It was fluky that I became engaged in this activity, but I was prepared for it in some ways. I've had a long-standing interest in marrying political science and psychology. Psychology is not just a natural biological science, it's a social science, and a great deal of psychology is shaped by social context. And then we have GERD next. We're going to end the stream. We have GERD next. Smart heuristics. Very, 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 very exciting. You know, I'm going to suggest to Sarah that while I read, she can do us a dance. Or, no, it's not going to be that. That was a funny joke that popped in my head. But now, a real idea. She'll read, and I'm going to do a funny dance. Okay. Or not a funny dance, a sassy dance. Now, Gerd, if you want to, go read something else by her before we read this together, she's got an essay in Brockman's This Explains Everything as well, and it's The Woes of Adolescence. And I'm not super interested in developmental psychology, I should be, but it was really just relevant to everything that we talk about on this channel and the different illusions that minds have about minds, and the determinism of it all. And also I think it's just really interesting. Maybe it was just that. I don't know, actually. Now, something I forgot to say. Bro, I did not expect to be so inspired by Tetlock's, this forecasting thing we just finished reading. And I don't know anything about Tetlock. What'd I say? I didn't say impressed. I said inspired. Okay, I don't have to justify nothing. But anyway, I am inspired. These forecasting competitions, I just feel less silly and autistic for wanting to standardize, formalize discussion. I want to do for discussion what he is doing for prediction. And actually a lot of what he's doing for prediction can just be applied to discussion, or to forecasting to discussion. So exciting. And your job is that if in a few months you're like, hey, Arius hasn't talked about these IARPA forecasting tournaments, what the deal? Hit my line, bro. Let me know, okay? Alright, thank you, everybody.